فسبح بحمد ربك وكن من الساجدين واعبد ربك حتى يأتيك اليقين.
الشيخ طاهر وايت أفضل من جاءنا من أمريكا، أفضل من جاءنا من أمريكا سلوكا، عقيدة، أخلاقا، أدبا. ما تركوا شيء من الألوان السب إلا وقالوه فيه. يمشي مع فلان، فعل مع فلان، قال مع فلان.
جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله فيكم ونفع الله بما قلتم. This question says, how old was Aisha when the Prophet ﷺ married her?
The question is a question that all English speakers should be aware of the answer to and how to deal with this, because there is an ideological assault on Islam. And that question is, how old was Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married her? And the answer is that she was 6 when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married her, and she was 9 when the marriage was consummated. And this is something that for many people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, or should I say both non-Muslim and Muslims alike, they find this to be something that is strange. That a man in his early 50s would marry a girl of 9 years old, or consummate a marriage with a girl of 9 years old. Radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. However, the first thing we need to look at when we look at the marriage of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to Aisha is that marriage is not an act of pure devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, what I mean by that is not a ritual act of worship. It's not like salat and zakat and fasting and making hajj. Marriage is a cultural element that has been given guidelines by the Sharia, like buying and selling, for example. Buying and selling is not ibadah in and of itself. It can turn into an ibadah based on a person's intentions, but in and of itself, it's not ibadah. But there are guidelines to buying and selling that have been established by the Sharia. Likewise, marriage is a cultural act that the Sharia has come and given certain guidelines to. Therefore, when we look at the marriage of anyone to anyone that happened 1400 years ago, that we cannot judge it based on the cultural lens that we have from today. In other words, we cannot look now at a marriage that took place then and say, with the belief or the culture that we have today, and juxtapose it on the culture that was present at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and say, oh, this is something that's extremely weird. So we take a step back and look at the culture of the people at that particular time, and did that seem to be something that was normal or abnormal amongst Semites in general, both the Jews and the Muslims, the Arabs at that particular time. A woman was considered to be of age once she reached puberty. She was considered to be of marriageable age. Whether that was 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever age they reached the puberty, that they were considered to be marriageable. So that wasn't something that was looked at as being something strange by the people of that time. And had it been so, then that would have been the first thing that they would have said about the Prophet ﷺ, because they said a bunch of other things about him. They said that he was majnoon, that he was crazy. Okay? They said that he was a sorcerer. They said that he was a kahin, yani a fortune teller. They said a bunch of things about the Prophet ﷺ. They never once said that he was a pedophile. They never once said that, oh, what's wrong with him? He marries these young girls. Because it wasn't seen as something that was abnormal for the time of the Prophet ﷺ, nor the times immediately after that, because Islam has spread within the first 100 years to the east and to the west. and it made it to Morocco and then into Spain and India and China. Okay, and nobody, and this is something that was very well known, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was a scholar of Islam. So it's not like she wasn't known, and it's not like the people didn't know that the Prophet ﷺ married her at a young age. Had this been something that was extremely abnormal, or even abnormal for that matter, then it would have been the first thing that they would have used as a deterrent from the Prophet ﷺ. That's from a cultural aspect. The other thing that we need to look at is that the Prophet ﷺ did not have a desire to marry Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha as a little girl. This came to him as a dream, and dreams were from the forms of prophecy. The dreams of the prophets are true. And as it comes to Sahih Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ saw in a dream that he was to marry Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. He went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and he informed him of the dream that he had. The marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha was divine, divinely inspired. And for those of you who look at the hikmah of the Prophet ﷺ's marriage to Aisha, you can see this inspiration that was there. Allah Azza wa Jal promised us to protect this deen. And He protected this deen through the companions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who memorized the Quran, who wrote the Quran down, who spread the Quran, who recited the Quran in every one of the 5 salawat, who taught it to those who came after them and protected the Quran. Likewise, they protected the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which explains to us the Quran. They protected the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which explains to us the Quran. And that Sunnah is not just what the Prophet ﷺ did in public. Anybody can go out in public and they can be someone who they are not. And they can sit in the masjid and they can stand in qiyam for an hour and in sujood for 20 minutes and do all of these things and be from the worst people behind the scenes when they go to their homes. And if you ask their children and their wives about them, they would tell you a whole different story. But if you ask the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about them, what stories do we get? Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is the one who narrated to us 2,210 hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these are the hadith where we can verify that the Prophet ﷺ was better behind the scenes than he was even in public. He was the one who would stand, as Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha narrated. He was the one who would stand until his feet would swell. And she would say to him, aren't you the one who has been forgiven all of his previous sins and all of his any of his sins? He said, أَفَلَا أَكُونُ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Should I not be a thankful servant to Allah? If it wasn't for the fact that Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was young and outlived all of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ except for Salama, and was a scholar of Islam in her own right and narrated to those who came after her and the generations that came after the Prophet ﷺ, because she didn't die until 47 or 48 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So she lived enough to be able to narrate all of these hadith and inform us that the hand of the Prophet ﷺ never touched the hand of a woman who was not mahram for her. And she informed us about the night prayer of the Prophet ﷺ. And she informed us about the gentleness and how the kind nature of the Prophet ﷺ to the end of it. We would have never known who this man, alayhi salatu wassalam, whom we love, we would have never known who he was behind the scenes, if you will, if it was not for Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So that marriage of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam to Aisha is not something that the Muslims should be ashamed of, or something that we should be afraid to talk about. Nah, the Prophet ﷺ consummated the marriage with her at 9 years old, and this was from Rabbul Alameen. This was not something that he had, a desire that he had in his own self. And we know, if you look up the definition of what a pedophile is a grown person who likes to have intimate relations with children, not one child. They don't stop at one. This is a disease. And the disease doesn't stop at 1 or 2. This is something that they have to be forced to be stopped. The Prophet ﷺ only had one wife that was a virgin, period. And one that was young like Aisha radiallahu anha, and that was her. And this is something again that was from Allah Azza wa Jal, that served as a means to protect and preserve this deen of al-Islam. The other thing to mention is that had Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha been the type We see today when young children are abused, sexually abused by elders, they have these problems the rest of their lives. They have problems. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha